I think I've actually grown russets that weren't as big as this fingerling. When's the best time to start gardening? The correct answer, yesterday. Guten gardening, everybody. Well, it's currently 52 degrees Fahrenheit, which is about 11 degrees Celsius for those of you who don't use the Fahrenheit scale. Here in Zone 5, Wisconsin, it's pretty early morning and it's rained pretty much all of last night. And I need to get out here and harvest our fingerling potatoes from our front yard and space. It's going to be an overcast day all day today, and I think the high is going to be around 60 degrees. That cold weather is definitely coming in, that fall weather. Other than the fact that my summer gardens are ending, it is definitely my favorite time of the year, my favorite weather of the year. I think this coming Wednesday evening, overnight, we're supposed to get temps around 37 degrees Fahrenheit. So that cold weather, that frost is coming before we'd like it, I think. But out front here, we have some fingerling potatoes that we planted just over 3 months ago. And we also talked about these fingerling potatoes in our video about hilling potatoes. And this is the area in our front yard and space where we have all of our simple, and I do mean simple, raised beds that we created using some of our terrace board and some of our wire. So I'm going to show you how easy it is to disassemble what we need to get access to these potatoes, and we're going to get hopefully a nice fingerling potato harvest going here. First and foremost, isn't this a beautiful spot here late September just to come out to the garden and see all this? We've got sweet potatoes that are just about ready in our green stalk vertical garden. I'm going to be harvesting these sweet potatoes later today, and we've got peppers coming in still, but here is the bed where we have our fingerling potatoes. You can see we've got a little bit of life. I think we have some fingerling potatoes here that are trying to re-sprout right here, but everything is pretty much dead. Now, one thing to note about the fencing that we have around here, it is small enough that most of our rabbits haven't been able to get through. Maybe a couple baby rabbits have been able to get through, but our voles have definitely still been able to have access to this if they've found it. So we'll see what's going on with that here. But the only thing keeping this piece in place right now is that it's implanted in the ground. So all I'm gonna do is lift up on the fencing the whole way around, and I'm gonna remove all of this metal very easily. One of the things I really like about these little beds like this, I mean, that's all it took right there. And now my bed is wide open to me. And I would imagine that the way I pulled that out just now, I probably pulled up some of the fingerlings in here. You better believe I did. All right, so here's some of the fingerlings. Apparently I pulled up a really big one over here. Now, that's a massive fingerling, yeah? That's an oddly shapen fingerling. That might be the coolest fingerling I've ever actually harvested. Now, if I wanted to, what I could do is to pull up the terrace board here as well. It's held in place by some of these black stakes that we have. I could pull this up quite easily if I wanted to relocate, but I don't really see a purpose because this isn't a gigantic bed. And so I don't think I really need to pull this up to have access to all points. But that's another simple feature, a nice feature of this bed, is that it's really easy to get in here and manipulate. What I want to do first is come through and get all of this hay that I put on top to try to prevent any of the solanine. I want to try to get all this hay out of here, and then I'm going to pull these up piece by piece, and we're going to see how we did. All right, I've got a good bit of the hay out of here. There's still going to be little pieces. That's all right. We'll put that off to the side. But what do we know about these fingerling potatoes specifically? Well, these are actually third generation fingerling potatoes. That's an amazing size for a fingerling potato. These are third generation fingerling potatoes, third generation Guten gardening fingerling potatoes. What I mean by that is that this is the third season we're harvesting from initial planting, and the initial planting we did was 1 pound of really old store-bought fingerling potatoes that we purchased for $1. Now, that first year after planting, we got about 8 pounds of harvest from a single pound planted, and that was fantastic. Last season, we took some of those and we planted them in containers. And interestingly enough, the harvest that we got from that wasn't huge. Actually, most of those fingerling potatoes were a little bit smaller, but we took those smaller fingerling potatoes and then we planted them here in the front yard and space. And we did a little bit of layering as well, but what's interesting is we're back to those bigger sizes, at least so far in the harvest. So third generation, these are from our seed potatoes last year. We've already got some really nice ones coming in. Now, I don't necessarily anticipate all of them being that larger size, and we'll probably see some of that here because some of these potatoes were planted a couple of weeks after the first planting. Once we saw where the potatoes weren't going to come up, there we go. Once we saw where they weren't going to come up, we went and added that second layer. So those are younger. They won't have grown as long. Look at the difference here where one was sticking above the soil and the hay didn't cover it enough. It's a really nice size fingerling. We've got some of that solanine. And solanine can look different depending on the original color of this potato. So it can look a little darker green than it looks on some of the other varieties. But basically what I would expect here is a pretty good mixture of sizes, just like you see right here. But I'm really hopeful for a nice harvest, especially given those initial results. Now with the rain we had, I would also imagine it's not going to be too difficult to work myself into this soil. Look at those beauties. To work myself into this soil a little bit. And this is a no-till bed. So what we're growing in here, we hadn't come through from last season and tilled it at all. All that we did was to add a little bit of compost on top. And so this bed has, I'm going to try to dig my fingers way down in here a little bit. This bed has a good bit of our native soil, that clay native soil in here. So there's plenty of nutrient content in here for sure. And one thing I'm not loving, these are going to grow closer to the surface. I'm not loving that I don't think I got a deep enough layer of that hay to protect all of these from the sun. That being said, there's still plenty that look great in here. And oh my, the size of these. Again, come back to this fact. Last year's harvest, I don't think I had a single one this big. But after about 100 days, and it's been, as I said, just over 3 months. So after about 100 days, the size of these this year are back to that nicer, bigger size. Now, as is the case with all of our potatoes, when it comes to feeding them, we definitely make sure we feed them after they bloom. After the flowers come up, we want to give our potatoes a nice feeding to make sure when they're in that developmental stage where these tubers are really starting to grow, that we're giving them plenty of nutrients that they need. But again, I think the soil in these front beds have only been used now. This is our second season. It's our seed potato right there. So this is only our second season of growing in here. So I think there's still, really this is fresh soil. These results are exactly what you'd want. Wow, look at these. Look at these fingerling potatoes. Tell me about the fingerling potatoes that you buy at the store. If you buy fingerling potatoes, they're not typically that big. I'm confident they're not typically as big as the ones coming out of here. This is probably closer to what you're getting for those fingerling potatoes. Now the question is, do you really want the bigger ones? Do you want the smaller ones? I would argue the taste of these bigger ones, because we've definitely had them this size before. The taste of these bigger ones is just as good, in my opinion, and we use them the same way. And with fingerling potatoes, you don't have to peel them as long as there's no damage to them. Just like a lot of our potatoes, we don't peel them. We can roast them. We can go in there, and I actually like steamed potatoes, but my favorite way to do these, my favorite way to prepare fingerlings is to just cut them in half and put them in the oven for about 45 minutes at about 425 degrees. I like to put some salt, some pepper, and some garlic on there, and to add some of that nice olive oil, and it's just amazing. You know what I'm realizing? This one and this one, these remind me of jacks. You've ever played the game, the kids' game of jacks? From my childhood. That's what those remind me of. Really odd shapes here, but you tell me you can't enjoy those regardless of the shape. And here we go. I cut out a lot of content in our recent store-bought versus certified seed potato video where I was pulling out all of these worms. I really cut out a lot of instances where I was pulling those worms out because I didn't want you to get bored, but I really think that speaks somewhat to the health of the soil we're growing in. All of those worms in there, we've got a really nice living soil here. And I think this is bearing out. These results are bearing that out. Look at this handful of fingerlings right there. Doesn't that look delicious? Now, there are a couple of things that I want to consider. I'm about halfway through this harvest right now, but this bed is in the front garden area, which gets the most sun out of any of our gardens. So this is a nice full sun area. Again, we've only been growing in this area for 2 years since we cut down our ash tree. But there's a reason why we didn't make broad generalizations in our last harvest video where we did certified seed potatoes versus store-bought. If you didn't see that video, I'll put a link in the description, but you need to check that one out because the results were pretty different. But there's a reason we didn't make these broad generalizations about how you always get better results from certified. You always get better results from store-bought. We didn't do anything like that because we've had great results from store-bought potatoes in the past. And I would say in this bed, which is about 8 square feet maybe, the results we're getting so far are bearing out the fact that, again, the starting point for these was a store-bought potato. Now, again, we've been growing these organically since that first season, since that first planting. But these results are showing us that you can definitely get good results from planting these store-bought potatoes initially, and again, kind of making them your own. And you get these kinds of results regardless of the solanine here. You get these kinds of results. This is what you really want in terms of yield, in my opinion. I would say that overall planting in here, remember that the seed potatoes we planted were actually a good bit smaller than what I'm harvesting right now. The seed potatoes we planted were a good bit smaller. And so I would say we planted under a pound of seed potatoes at most in this bed. So it's gonna be really interesting to see what that yield is now. And one thing that I haven't really shown you here, but I really like about this bed, you see a couple weeds around here. Actually, this is not a weed. Well, it's kind of a weed because I didn't want it growing here. This is chamomile, but for the most part, we're not really seeing a lot of weeds in this bed, which I think is really nice. Again, no till, but the weeds are mostly to the exterior. This hay, when you cover with hay, it does keep the soil moist, it keeps the sun out, and it also really helps to keep the weeds down. So we don't have to deal with much of this in our harvest. And as these are mounded beds, you'll see, if I had to really dig down, because digging for potatoes sometimes, that's a big one, can be a challenge because these are mounded beds. The soil at the top is looser. Because we hilled these beds, the soil at the top is looser, and we're getting potatoes that look like this. Great sized potatoes. If you've grown fingerlings before, there we go, there's another potato right here. A lot of these jacks, that's what they really are. They're like playing jacks. If you've grown these potatoes before, or fingerling potatoes before, I'd like you to leave us a comment and let us know what your experience has been like. And if you would, let us know what your preference is in terms of the overall size of your fingerling potatoes. Because I got to tell you, I couldn't be more thrilled with the harvest I'm getting. And the fact that the voles left this alone. I mean, so far, the rabbits, that fencing discouraged the rabbits. You know, rabbits are creatures, typically, if there's plenty of food, they're creatures of opportunity. So you make something easily accessible to them, then they're gonna come in there and they'll take advantage of that. Look at that. Whoa, that is probably gonna be our biggest fingerling that we're harvesting today. That's my guess. And the voles, well, again, they had the potential to get in here and they're not. You wait till you see what this harvest looks like. Big amount of fingerling potatoes, I think, in a little bed. In my last potato harvest video, one of the things I said was, sometimes you just need a harvest. And I had one person say in the comments that they definitely needed a harvest sometimes. Come on, let us know. Do you just need a harvest sometimes? I mean, this is setting the tone for the day. It's giving us a great start to a day, and I'm just, come here. And I'm just so excited to be able to get in here and get this going. I gotta say, every single time we struggle with one thing, it seems like there's something there, some other thing there to encourage us, to back us up in our pursuits of growing our own food. This growing your own food idea is so important. Wait till you see what's right here. I mean, I can feel it under the ground right now. We talk about, and I talked about this in a recent video, about how the nutritional value of some vegetables has gone down. The store-bought vegetables has gone down over the years. We're in control in this harvest. We know the bone meal we added. We know the mycorrhizal we added at the beginning of this. We know how we fed it with fertilizer. We know it was organic. We've controlled this process from beginning to end as best we could. That's the ability, that's the benefit of growing your own food. You want to become self-sufficient? It doesn't take a lot of space. Again, maybe 10 square feet with this bed. This bed could be any size I wanted it to be with this terrace board. So maybe 10 square feet. The only cost for growing these potatoes, because again, these are from last year's harvest, the only cost for us was to make this bed, which probably with the fencing and everything else cost about $10, and the cost of the fertilizer. That's it. And we're getting these out of here. And that means next season, whatever we plant in this bed, we may not plant potatoes in this exact bed, but we've already put down that initial cost, that initial investment, and now we can just grow for the cost of fertilizer. And now we have quail waste that we're going to use for composting. We have all of our worm bin compost, our worm castings. We have all of that to go in to help create this nutrient dense soil. A lot of those expenditures are in the past. And so what does that mean? That means that we're spending less now for this great organic food, for this nutrient dense food like this. We're spending now less money on that than we would have had to in the past. That initial investment is there. When's the best time to start gardening? The correct answer, yesterday. All right, I am almost finished pulling these beauties out of the ground. This harvest took me probably 12-13 minutes, and part of that time is because I'm talking to you and taking my time through this because I really want you to experience this with me. Oh, this is such an easy harvest. This is going to be such a productive harvest. And you know what? We planted from last year's harvest. We're going to take some of these. We'll likely take some of these with the solanine damage that we're not going to be able to eat up here. We'll take these, we'll keep them, we'll store them, and we're going to bring them right back and we're going to plant them again. All right, this is part of the harvest. I'm going to pile it all up and show you what we got, and then we'll get a weight. All right, look at what we got here from this really small bed, and maybe a pound of seed potatoes planted. You can see the amount of space they're taking up in this bed. And one more thing I'll say, these all grew within maybe, 3 inches of the surface. They didn't grow all that deep for us. It's a good thing we hilled them up, but look at those results. Let's get a weight on this and see what our yield on investment was. Now let's get these weighed up in our paper bag. What do you think? What's your prediction? Here we go. About a pound planted, and our yield, 7.2 pounds. Well, hey, how about that to start the day off right for us here at Guten Gardening? I'll tell you what, I enjoyed that harvest an awful lot, and I can't wait to harvest some more stuff today. I got a lot to do out here. It's funny how fall works that way. Well, this should show you you don't need a ton of space to grow your own potatoes. If we can do that, so can you. Well, we really hope you enjoyed today's video, and if you did, don't forget to give us a like, leave us a comment, remember to share and subscribe, and most importantly, remember, when you're with us, you are good to grow.